A second really important concept to understand as to why we aren't naturally better breathers is that we are what we repeatedly do. And I'm going to say that again. We are what we repeatedly do. And what do we repeatedly do with regards to breathing? We breathe in a way that's comfortable. The moment we encounter really strenuous, sort of forceful breath, we stop very often if we have a choice. If we're just exercising, it's very rare that somebody will push to that point where the breath is being burned and where you feel horrible, unless we have to. If we're very competitive and in a sport, well then there's a reward for going beyond that. But in our everyday function, if we're raking leaves in the backyard or cutting the grass or we're doing something, we get out of breath, we stop and we take a breather. So another reason why we aren't better breathers is because the actual work of improving our breath begins exactly at the threshold where we comfortably stop. It's precisely at that point when things get uncomfortable that the real work begins. And so the good news is, if you do play competitive sports, or if you are, let's say, a farmer or a layman that works with their hands all day long, very often there are objectives, whether it's bringing in the harvest or doing something before the rain falls or finishing a job before the end of the day. And in sport, there are certainly very specific competitive objectives of scoring or defending. So any of these goals can very joyfully and mindfully allow us to bypass that natural resistance. But even if we're talking about isolated training, deciding to focus on our breath, the good news, as we'll see shortly, is that the majority of research shows you don't need to do much to get huge results. We're looking at 2 instances a day, maybe 1 to 3 minutes a day, and we can garner massive improvements in our breathing. The second bit of good news is that our capacity will pretty much plateau after about 6 to 7 weeks according to most research. And at that point, we can actually reduce the amount that we do that already limited training to just every second day or maybe 3 times a week, and we can largely maintain our capacity. So before you start to get freaked out that it's going to be really demanding and something that you can't integrate conveniently into your everyday life, the very, very good news is that you can quite simply, with just minutes a day, massively improve how you breathe. It starts with those drills that we've already done, and now we're going to get deeper. Oftentimes when people address the idea of breathing, they really don't even talk about the mechanics of breathing. And there's a very good chance most of us have forgotten our, early high school biology and maybe aren't that clear on how it happens. So we're just going to take a minute to understand the 4 essential steps to breathing. The very first step, of course, is that we take air into the body, and that'll happen generally by the nose or sometimes by the mouth. So the air is taken into the body. The second step is that air that you've taken in, that oxygen that you've taken in, is transferred from the alveoli in the lungs into the capillaries, getting into the blood. So the oxygen is basically transferred from the lungs into the bloodstream. Step 3, that collected oxygen in your blood is then delivered from the lungs throughout all of the blood to all of the muscles in your body. So all of that oxygen we've collected now just shoots through our body, swims through our body, and fills us. That's why I very often say when we do deep breathing, particularly for relaxation, it's not only a nice visualization, but it's factually true that every single breath you take goes in through your nose, into your lungs, and then fills your body to the furthest corner, to the tips of your toes, to the edges of your fingers. Every single part of you is literally and factually filled with the air that you breathe in. And then finally we have step 4, and that is when the oxygen that you've taken in is diffused from the muscles into the actual cells. What's important to understand, and sometimes this is confusing, is that the passage of oxygen throughout your body is not an active one. It's what's termed a passive diffusion, meaning that that oxygen distributes itself according to the function of your body. And what's important to understand is that there's nothing we can do as individuals to improve those later stages when the oxygen is distributed and diffused. That will happen as efficiently as your body operates. There is no physical exercise that can improve that diffusion. The only place we can improve our capacity is in our actual intake of oxygen. If we can take more in, then there is more potential reserve for our body to then diffuse. But the actual rate of diffusion and transport in the body is constant, dependent on the health of the individual. There's nothing you can do, there's no amount of cardio you can improve to increase that diffusion. That may sound a little bit confusing right now, but it's going to become very, very important that we understand what we can't do and what we can do. And what we can do is we can take responsibility for lung capacity. In times of calmness, when we're seeking to relax, that may mean reducing the rate of our breath and reducing the amount we intake, one aspect of sufficiency. In times of elite performance and optimal function, that might mean making sure in our training that we've isolated and we've tested and resisted our inspiratory capacity, our ability to breathe in. So we've strengthened and maximized that capacity. We've grown our lung capacity. We've increased our breath strength so we can take in all that we can take in. But once we've taken it in, it's up to our body to do the rest. So that's the good news, bad news. There's very few things we can do to improve that breathing, but what we can do is very clear, and the science is emerging and quite clear on that as well. And now it's time to get into that. A very large focus in all of our level 1 work was this idea of achieving a braced and neutral spine, where we sort of engage the tailbone or the pelvic floor and curled it under, bracing the lower lumbar arch, where we gently contracted the shoulder blades together, and where we elongated the neck and lowered the chin slightly, so that all 3 arches of our spine were in an optimal position. Now, very often people will ask me, man, are we expected to do that all the time? Is that the way I'm supposed to stand all the time? This is exhausting. And the short answer is yes. You are expected to do that work until that posture becomes the default posture, until that's happening more often than not, until it's unthinkingly natural in our body, and until the point where I realize, oh, I'm out of posture, and it becomes reflexive and immediate for us to make those 3 spinal adjustments in the cervical, thoracic, and lumbar arch to correct it. So yes, that is how we're supposed to be standing and sitting and sleeping and correcting ourselves when we're not. That's extremely important. But as we saw, we cannot breathe at the expense of our structure, and we cannot have structure at the expense of our function and our breathing. All right, let me give you another example now. What I would like you to do as you're watching this download, whether you're standing or sitting, is to achieve a neutral brace position in your spine. Gently curl your tailbone and pelvic floor underneath. Pull the ribs gently in towards the spine. Lightly and calmly shrug the shoulders up and back, squeezing the shoulder blades together, and then elongate the nape of the neck, lowering the chin slightly, but never to a point where the voice would change. It's always very natural and elongated. So whether sitting or standing, acquire that position. What's going to be extremely important is that those ribs are pulling in towards the spine, and that pelvic floor is curled underneath, so that the lower back is slightly elongated and in a state of traction. Now, maintaining that, I want you to inhale fully through your nose and feel the expansion of your lungs. Feel the diaphragm lowering and that body wanting to open against the resistance of that braced posture. This is the key to everything. We need to learn to breathe optimally in a braced position. How often have we seen or experienced exhaustion where people lean forward, commonly putting their hands on their knees and out of breath? Why does this happen? This happens because all of the muscles that are required to keep us up and braced are so fatigued we want to take some burden off them to make it easier to breathe. And that's fully acceptable and fully normal and fully natural and healthy. When we lean forward on our knees, our structural muscles can relax. So if I just sit here braced and I try to breathe, I'll naturally feel the resistance of my brace. And if I just lean forward like this onto my knees and I release those muscles, the breathing becomes effortless. The difficulty is that when we're required to move forcefully or quickly, when we're under load or stress, when we need to torque or move with the rest of our body, we can't afford to be in that fully relaxed state. So the next step is for us to revisit those level 1 concepts and to really own them, to take full responsibility for them and to say, yes, not only do I need to practice and learn how to remain braced in a neutral position while breathing fully, it will become very natural and automatic with very little work. And I mean this, with very little work. If you brace yourself and for your next exercise, perform 30 to 40 breaths, fully and completely, in that braced position, at the beginning of your day and at the end of your day. 30 to 40 breaths twice a day in that braced position. I guarantee you by the end of 1 week, at the end of 7 days, it will be infinitely more comfortable. You will not need to think about it. You'll be able to do it much more relaxedly. If we go back to the studies done by Stuart McGill, and we say, I'm going to make that first session in the morning when I'm fresh and I'm keen, but I'm going to make that second session right after my most strenuous workout, when I'm completely exhausted at the end of training, and I'm going to make braced breathing my cool down. By doing that, we now reinforce not only correct breathing with structure, but psychologically, we ingrain this idea that it's possible and it's doable when I'm at my most fatigued and when I'm most stressed. And that's even more important, psychologically speaking, with relation to combat. So your next objective, learn to breathe braced. Achieve a neutral spine, brace those muscles. The only limit is your capacity. In everyday life, I can brace very naturally and function. But then when that becomes comfortable, in order to garner results from this exercise, I will brace at absolute maximum capacity. I will contract my pelvic floor underneath and pull my abs in as hard as I possibly can without letting it get up to my neck. I will brace everything as hard as I can. I'll even sometimes contract those shoulders extra hard, and then I will try to breathe fully against that resistance. So that very simple exercise is reinforcing correct posture and structure, correct breathing, and adding inspiratory resistance against the inhale, which is in effect increasing not only the power of your inhale, but also the capacity of your lungs. Because the muscles that we need to open those lungs up and to maximize our inhale are working against load. They're working against resistance. And like any other weightlifting exercise, if we work our inspiratory muscles, we will strengthen our capacity. The good news is we don't really need to work on the exhalation, because the exhalation can be passive. The only time we actively exhale is when we're looking to escape force or to control breath in certain power or burst breathing exercises. But we don't need massive capacity for that. Where we need capacity is on the inhale. And so the inspiratory phase, the inhalation muscles, are what we need to work on. So 30 to 40 braced breaths every day, at least twice a day, until that becomes a little bit natural.